Greetings, everybody. I don't know why I cheese so much right there, but greetings. I was looking at Andrew, and his face is just funny.
I do have like a very funny,
Yeah,
like vague face. It's
you
like a
do.
face you would see like mysteriously, like in a dream, and like you wouldn't recognize it. You
It's
know?
just like looking over my bed. Like,
Yeah.
anyways, today we're talking about the three good forms of government. The three real ones know what this is from.
Real ones do three like this. Yeah.
The real ones do three like this. You ever seen Inglourious Bastards? Total propaganda movie, but so many funny little bits from it.
Yeah. It's my favorite piece of propaganda.
That and the Untouchables, but like
Yeah.
un-Catholic things in that movie. But
Yeah.
anyways, both movies. And then the three bad forms of government. So this is according to Aristotle, St. Thomas, even Montesquieu gets into this a little bit. If you don't know who Aristotle is, Aristotle was a philosopher who was a student of Plato. He's from ancient Greece, and he was like probably one of the brightest minds ever come out of ancient Greece. If you don't know who Plato is, he was also a philosopher, was also quite bright, but got some things wrong, and Aristotle perfected him. And if you don't know who Plato is, he was a student of Socrates. And if you don't know who Socrates is, he was also a philosopher, but he would ask a lot of questions like, right, what is justice? You know what I mean? He was battling dudes called the Sophists, and the Sophists were just a bunch of they were people who were how would you describe them best? I mean, they were jerks.
I mean, the Sophists were like a bunch of rage baiters who would
Yes.
just use like arguments to not find the truth, but to just use it to like get what they wanted.
Yeah.
You know, they will like use fancy
like Reddit
words
users.
and like Reddit. Yeah, they're like a bunch of. So if you've ever been on the internet, you've met a sophist. And the Socrates was a guy who was going around responding to them. This is about Aristotle is about 300 and something years before our Lord. So this is like before divine revelation comes to the nations, and it's people like we were talking about last episode through natural law, obviously under sin, trying to figure out the basic answers to everything that humans can find out. And Aristotle really touched on every subject out there, but we're focusing especially on today Aristotle's books, which is just called The Politics, which is
Quite
so influential. Yeah.
And then St. Thomas, right? So St. Thomas Aquinas, he was a philosopher and theologian in the Middle Ages. He died 1274. There's a great video about his life from Christian Wagner. I'm gonna link it down below. It's just so fun and entertaining. Highly recommend you sit through the 2 hours. It was awesome. I loved every second of it. And St. Thomas was like, besides like our Lord and Our Lady, was probably the smartest guy who ever lived.
Oh yeah,
like without a doubt, was like the smartest guy who ever lived. Never committed a mortal sin. He's not the only person who never committed a mortal sin, but he never committed a mortal sin. He wrote extensively on Catholic theology and philosophy. He is the church has dubbed him the common doctor, right? So like he's kind of your go-to guy when it comes to like theology and philosophy. And then the Baron de Montesquieu was a little French guy from the 18th century, so the 1700s. And he was a big influence on our nation's founding fathers. He's not perfect, but he actually has a lot of good little gems in there, especially when it comes to how a republic should be. So we're going to touch on him a little bit today because I think he has some good things to say, especially about what a republic should look like. And we're also going to kind of get into how what our country is, because that's also something we want to get to. We just don't want to focus on Catholicism. We want to focus on Catholicism meeting the culture in the United States, because the United States, as Andrew and I have said, we love this country. Like I was born in America and I will die an American, God willing. And, but I'm a Catholic first. So I want my Catholic beliefs to permeate in this country. And I think that there is a union that could be had there, because there's some similarities that if the American politics and American culture and American government and law is baptized, it will transform into something gorgeous. So let's get started with the first form of
Well, I
government.
think we should talk about what government even
Oh,
is.
that's actually a good idea.
I mean, because like government, people just think that government is like, they just know it as like that mysterious thing that hides behind the flag that steals all my money. Like that's kind of like what people think is. But we really got to focus on like what government is, and let's tie in some of the previous episodes, right? So
That's a
we were
good
talking
idea.
about
Actually,
how,
that's a really good idea.
yeah. So God, God is the creator of everything and the source of all authority. So all authority that's legitimate ultimately must come from God. Now, God has designed the first society, which is the family, and the head of that society, the head of that first society, that family, is the father, and there's obviously the mother and the children. Now, we talked about family in the third episode, so that's on YouTube. But we also talked about how I think the best definition of society was given by St. Pius X, who said it's the union of families underneath, the like one headship that they've decided for themselves, right? So the family is the first society. In the family, the father gets his authority from God over his children. And when all of these families get together, they create some sort of government. They're like, okay, we're going to rule ourselves in this specific way. So there's three main types of government families can choose to organize themselves under. And these three main good ways have three corrupted, three perverse ways. So there's really 6 forms of government, like worldwide, that every country could basically fall under. So a government basically is the way that the families of the land have ordered themselves, so to speak. Does that make sense? I mean, it's kind of like a broad definition, but I always like to begin
Yeah,
from
yeah.
beginning and
So
from
actually,
principles.
I like so the way a government's supposed to work is right. This is again a lot of my stuff that I have stems back to my Catholic political thought class at Franciscan, and I was combing through those notes a little bit recently, and the way a government and a society is supposed to function, it's supposed to be there to mirror the man's nature, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
So it's and what's man's nature? What's man's ultimate end, right? Like what is our end goal, right? To put it in layman's terms, it's heaven, right? So we're supposed to get up there, right?
mm-hmm,
We're supposed to get up to heaven and be with Jesus Christ, our Lord and our God, right? And government is supposed to help us get there. Like not a lot of people in our modern day and age are going to be thinking that,
mm-hmm.
right? Um and unfortunately we've lost that, right? Like we Andrew and I have talked about a lot about this like social contract, right? And that's something we want to beat out of your guys' head. Like I don't want you guys to be thinking like that anymore because that's a bad way to think. It's a very poor way to think. Because the moment you're like, "Oh, I'm just an individual and I'm going to make a contract with this individual so he doesn't like kill me or steal my stuff." Like that's very base. It's a very base thing to think about. And what I mean by base is that it's so low level, right? It's like it's a devolving from what government's actually supposed to be, right? So it's just like, oh, I just want the federal government or the state government or the town government not to come in and like steal my property. Like, yeah, I want that. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want them to like be stealing copious amounts of money out of my paycheck, which they already do, right? To be quite frank, like
Mm-hmm.
to be frank, no. I want government to be there to be like, oh, okay, like what is our community's ultimate goal? Well, it's to get to heaven, right? So there's a point where sovereignty ends, right? The sovereignty of the individual ends. There's a point where authority begins, right? So it's just like, yeah, like if the government were to be like, oh, I don't want like we want to come in and we want to steal half of your paycheck to go towards something ridiculous. Yeah, I don't even know because there's so
We
many
could do a whole
ridiculous
episode
things.
on
Yeah,
taxes.
we could do a whole. I would love to. I would just love to just absolutely eviscerate the tax system.
Mm-hmm.
But no, like government should sit. Okay, like we shouldn't be taking this money because okay, like, this is a great example, right? Economic ends are good, right? So it's just like, okay, if we're going to have a government that is sitting there saying, okay, we're going to raise the tax prices because we got to do this, this, and this. Okay, well, it's going towards improving the roads. It's going towards, redoing the infrastructure. Okay, that's cool. Like, I'm okay with that. You know what I mean? Like, oh, it's so like our whatever you do stuff like that. And then all of a sudden, they're sending $600 million to Ukraine or Israel. I'm like, okay, hold on. Hold the road. You know what I mean? I'm like, that I thought we were going to be paying for infrastructure. And that's not conducive to like my area being good. But that's still at a very low level, right? Government should be sitting there, okay, you have all of these laws that are, against there's a lot of laws that are against our Catholic beliefs. You know what I mean? And I think that one could say that that's not conducive towards our final end, right? Like I'm not like
I think I know what you're trying to say. I think
yeah.
I think I'm gonna
You could
jump in now.
Please do.
So basically, we as people were not designed to reach our final end on our own. We're not
Yes.
individuals who can get to our perfection, the fulfillment of our nature by ourselves. It's like, okay, then we've got family. But even one family unit isn't sufficient to get itself to its final end, to its perfection, to its happiness. We talked about in the previous episode about the natural law and how God designed us in a specific way. And when we do the things we're designed to do, we're happy. When we do things we aren't designed to do, we're not happy. But God designed it so that way no one person, not even just one family on its own, can do everything it has to do to find fulfillment.
Yes.
So
yes.
by God's design, you have to have a group of families that are all trying to reach their proper end, what they were made to do. And ultimately, we are made to worship God. Therefore, the government or the state has to in some way help. The reason it exists, the reason the government exists, is so that way it can be easier to get to heaven. It can be easier to fulfill what humanity was made to do. That's the whole reason government exists. And this is a line from St. Thomas's De Regno, Book 1, Section 15, where he says, the end of a government is to lead the thing governed in a suitable way to its proper end. So that's what we mean. The reason government doesn't exist for the sake of a different people, it exists for the sake of those families and helping their lives be easier so they can do what they're supposed to do, right? And obviously there are subordinate ends, like a husband is supposed to provide for his family. That's a subordinate end. And take care of each other. We can know natural truths. We can make art, et cetera, et cetera. Those are legitimate ends that the government could be helping us to do. But the ultimate end, the whole reason we even have a government, is so that way everybody has the means to worship God, right? And this is expressed in a variety of ways. We have to have an army to protect ourselves, because if we can't protect ourselves, we can't worship God properly. The government, that's a whole tangent, but that's kind of the general overview that I want to be the foundation, so that we could talk about the 6 types of government. And this can be kind of like an episode people can go back to.
Exactly.
And, okay, what do they say about government here? And then from these general principles that we're drawing from Aristotle and through the tradition that's in the Catholic tradition, but also even the political secular tradition that formed our country, by examining these principles, we can then apply it to the real world, like Connor was saying.
Exactly. Like for instance, right? Like in the United States, there used to be obscenity laws, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like there used to be obscenity laws. Like you couldn't be lewd. Like you couldn't print blasphemy, and there used to be blasphemy laws on the books, right?
Yeah.
So, and that's all oriented towards our end, right? Like if you are going to tax me out of my money, so therefore it goes towards the roads, so I can have an easier time getting to mass on Sundays. That's awesome. That's great. Like I have no problem. Like infrastructure is always one of the top things that is going down the drain.
Yeah.
I mean,
no. I mean, I don't like taxes, but I don't think we should focus too much on that, because then we're going to shift the topic of the episode.
No, I know that, but what I'm saying is that the government has certain authority to do things, but in the theme of this episode, sometimes it overreaches those, and it could become tyrannical, and it could become it could be set in one certain very few people's hands to do bad. So to hop into this, right? I also want to quote St. Thomas from De Regno. The aim of any ruler. This is from De Regno, but I might be getting the section wrong, right? But the aim of any ruler should be directed towards securing the welfare of that which he undertakes to rule. So the first good form of government that Aristotle lays down is monarchy, right? And Americans are like, whoa. Like, what do you mean monarchy's good? You know what I mean? Like, don't you know that Louis XIV was bad and tyrannical? Don't you know that King George III was being mean to us American colonists and letting those French Catholics up in Quebec have their religion. You know what I mean? Like, no, like monarchy can be a good form of government. And what makes it a good form of government? Well, it's all about the common good of the people. So if there's one guy in charge, right? If there's one guy in charge and he has the common interests of the people in mind, then therefore it is a good government because he's not interiorly focusing on himself. He's not focusing on how do I make more money, how do I secure more, goods for myself? How are the goods allocated to my people?
Yeah, exactly. So, what the three good governments have in common is that the power exists for the sake of the people that's under them. All of the authority that they have exists to help those below them. Whereas the three tyrannical governments, all their power exists to take things from those below them and to use for their own end. So, what separates the two groups is what is power for? The three good will say it's for the people, the three bad will say it's for me to aggrandize myself. So the first form of good government, Aristotle, St. Thomas, basically everybody before the 1700s would say that this is the best form of government, is monarchy, which is just Greek for rule of one. There's one guy in charge, and what he says goes, basically, and he wields this power for the sake of those beneath him. And I think it's now, no, I'm not a, well, first of all, we're gonna probably try and do each of these forms of government having their own episode. This is just a general thing. We'll probably have a special guest on to talk about monarchy, but I don't consider myself a monarchist. But I do think it's important to admit that the real world is a monarchy because God is the king, right? Because Christ is the
Yeah,
king. So
Christ is king.
reality is governed in a monarchical way at its very foundation because God is king over all the earth. Christ is king over all creation. So we can agree with Aristotle, with everybody, that monarchy is the greatest form of government, but that doesn't mean it has to be put everywhere because there's a specific history, specific people, specific virtues and vices that might make one government more suitable for one area. So
Exactly.
reality is in itself a monarchy because God is king. And the family is monarchical, right? You know, you don't get to vote as children to outvote your parents. And if you do, it's disordered because the authority stems from the father over the wife and the children. And the father rules the family as head, as it says in Ephesians 5 and throughout the scriptures. And the father is the head, not for the sake of, abusing the members of the family, but for the sake of leading them to their perfection, right? Because the head does not want to abuse the other organs, but leads the whole body into perfection, into fruition. So a monarchy is the best form of government. It's in reality, it's in our families. But, men, I think we are more sinful, a little bit more demon than angel is one way of putting it, right? Where when we see power, and by men I just mean humanity, but when we're given absolute power, we typically get corrupted almost immediately. So, though monarchy is the greatest form of government, Aristotle, no wait, I think it's St. Thomas in his commentary on the Politics, he'll say, the corruption of the best is the worst. So you got to be careful with monarchy because then it immediately leads to the first corrupt form, which is tyranny, which is basically when one guy is in charge and he's using all of the resources of the country to make himself rich and powerful, right? When we think of dictatorships and things like that, those are tyrannies. So we could even say like King George III or King Louis XIV, they were kings, but I wouldn't really call them monarchs. They were tyrants, basically, is what I would call them.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the finer points about King George and King Louis, but I mean,
Mm-hmm.
there have been great saintly monarchs throughout history, like
Mm-hmm.
King Louis the Ninth, King Saint Louis the Ninth of France. Um, like I'm not sure if this is like real or not, but I've heard the quote that he said that uh was it him who, or was it Baldwin? It might have been Baldwin the Fourth of Jerusalem, who said, "How can I wear a crown of gold when my Lord wore a crown of thorns when he was in the
Mm-hmm.
Holy Land?" I
Mm-hmm.
do know that King Louis the Ninth, King Saint Louis the Ninth, did go to the Holy Land at certain points. Funny
Yeah.
enough, King Saint Louis the Ninth would have had dinner with Thomas Aquinas once.
That's right. Yeah,
Um,
he did. He did,
I,
huh?
I I love that story.
Yeah.
Um, but anyways, that's a whole different thing. I don't want to get into that little
Yeah,
tangent,
we would
but
get way too off topic. But when you have a saintly monarch, that's the best form of government you can have is a saintly monarchy.
yes,
But that, like, if we read, like, we look at scripture, it's a monarchy in Israel. David, a great saintly king. Solomon, great king goes, astray. But it literally can be in a generation where we have a saint king who wrote books of the Bible to we have a demon worshiping madman who's like attacking everybody all the time. So the thing about monarchy is that it could switch on an instant depending on who's in charge,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah, and
that's why it's like, okay, it's the best form of government. When it works, it's the best. When it doesn't work, it's the worst. So that's why I would never support a
and
monarchy. I would never advocate for a monarchy in the U.S. I would
and
not.
that's the thing too, because the United States, and we're going to get into it towards the end of the episode, but the United States is a very temperamental country, right?
Yeah.
Right. So I would never personally go for a monarchy in the United States. But the funny thing is that if like you were to have small, I love the quote from G.K. Chesterton, right? Where you can have you should keep politicians close enough to kick them, but
Hmm.
that's the thing though. A monarch is not a politician. He's not supposed to be a politician, right?
Hmm.
A monarch is raised from the very first moment he's conceived, right? He is born and bred to rule,
Hmm.
right? And if he's not raised with proper virtue, if he is not raised with with sanctity on his mind, then he is going to end up becoming a tyrant unless
Yeah.
he has a conversion later on down the line,
Yeah.
right? So that's the first point, right? So
Hmm.
monarchy in my mind, right? And God bless the monarchists, because I think their hearts are in the right place, because you have great saintly guys like
Like
Blessed
think of
Karl the
Constantine. Think
First.
of Constantine.
Yeah,
We wouldn't have had the prominence of Christianity without a monarch, Constantine. But it's also proof that things can change on a dime. It's also proof that
exactly.
things can change on a dime.
Exactly. So let's get into the second form of government now,
Well,
which is
we've basically touched the first two, which was monarchy and tyranny, right? Because there's the good
well,
version and the bad version.
well, I'm getting into the second layer now, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
which is aristocracy, which is ruled by the few, ruled by the virtuous few, right?
Hmm.
So where can we see aristocracy prominent in the last couple hundred years? Well, a lot in Europe, right? So you have your dukes, you have your barons, you have your lords, um and these are the guys that a lot of them are well educated, but some are miscreants. Some are like total miscreants. And the bad for and I don't really know like what else much to say about aristocracy, because there hasn't been a point too much in history where like it's just the aristocracy ruling, right?
Yeah.
If you go to England, for instance, right? The House of Lords, right? So the way England works, they have a lower house. When it comes to their legislature, they have a lower house, which is the House of Commons. Those are people democratically elected, which is the next form of government, but we'll save that in a second. And then you have the House of Lords, right? And those are supposed to be your aristocratic class. Um, and those are the people that are very supposed to be well educated, and they're supposed to rule for virtue. They're supposed to be very virtuous, and they're supposed to be ruling virtuously. The opposite form of uh aristocracy would be oligarchy, right?
Hmm.
And that is ruled by the few for their own common interests. And
Hmm.
unfortunately, that is the common way aristocracy is used, right? So you see it a lot. There's we can get into this maybe a little bit later in the episode, but typically nowadays it seems that there are a few, relative few, that are ruling for their own interests, whether that's big government, whether that's big business, whether that's a mixture of both, in cahoots with each other, and it doesn't suit the people well, right? Like
Hmm.
you see, you could ask anybody and be like, hey, like, do you think that like the people in charge are ruling in our best interests, like the people in the
Nobody
Senate and
thinks that.
people running in running the companies? No, like nobody thinks that. And I'm not saying, like, as I said, like I don't believe in any acts of violence towards these people. I don't believe in, as I said, like the whole, like you don't want to go out and do that sort of thing. But that is what we have, unfortunately.
Yeah, so I'll just jump in and give a similar analysis of what you were saying. Aristocracies rule the few, the virtuous. So basically, it's aristocracy flows from this very common sense notion that I think a lot of people in the U.S. are kind of like a bit hesitant to say, but some people are just better at being in charge than other people. Some people are smarter, some people are stronger, some people are better leaders, they're better orators, they're better soldiers. And aristocracy basically says if you're better at leading, you should be the leader, is essentially
Yeah.
what aristocracy is. Now, there are people who are the best are always a smaller class, right? You're not going to have 100 people who are the best, over 100 people. It's going to be a very small, by definition, it's going to be a very small amount of people who are the best, ruling everything that's below them for the sake of everybody below them, right? But you never really see aristocracy pure and of itself as a government. I mean, you typically see it mixed in with other governments because
Yeah.
it's really hard to just do something by yourself. But we do see its corruption, oligarchies a lot. And I'll take Aristotle, what he said about oligarchies this is from the Politics, Book 3, Chapter 7. He says, oligarchy has in view the interests of the wealthy. He just comes out and says it's going to be a small amount of people who are very rich. So an oligarchy basically is when there's a small amount of people who are very rich and they're basically in charge of everybody else. They turn society basically into their own kind of slaves without even saying the term, where they're going to use them, take their money and use it for themselves who are already wealthy. So they got into their positions of power by their own wealth, and they're going to use this position of influence to make themselves even richer.
Yeah.
Is essentially what an oligarchy is. So whereas a monarchy, they're mostly hereditary, right? Not always, but they're mostly hereditary. You're kind of born into it. Whereas with an oligarchy, you can use your money as influence. I'm going to influence these people with my money. I'm going to use favors. I'm going to use the mass media, what have you, to get into power. And I would say oligarchy is what you get. It's like with dying capitalism, right? Because
Yeah.
unfettered capitalism. Now, I'm not against capitalism, but unfettered capitalism, unrestricted capitalism, which we could do a whole episode on, which has been condemned by the church many times, basically allows for somebody who is incredibly wealthy to just buy out the competition, and then they end up having more power than the government in most instances. But then they can use their money to buy a seat in Senate, and they'll have the senators do whatever they want them to do, pushing those agendas. So the corruption of
Yeah.
aristocracy is oligarchy, which you typically see in, I would say, most institutions that have some sort of bureaucratic class.
Yeah. And that's something that makes a lot of people in our era very angry. Very, very angry, including you and me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I think most people are kind of on board to the fact that we are living in a very oligarchical society.
Well, I mean, look. You see, senators like they go into Senate. I forget what their minimum wage or salary is, but they come out millionaires. They come out multimillionaires. Like you go into Senate, your job is to be, all right, I'm going to help the people below me, but then you end up coming out a millionaire because somehow by being in the Senate, you somehow magically learned which companies are going to be incredibly profitable, and then you're a millionaire the entire time. It's like, well, you're something's going on in this body that's supposed to be legislating for our sake, where they are by this position, they're just becoming incredibly wealthy and they're using that wealth to support their people, to support their own agendas, right? It's not about
Yeah.
like, I mean, I'll just come out and say it. I don't think that I think all of the forms of government that we have in the U.S., because the U.S., jumping a bit forward to what Montesquieu has to say. Montesquieu basically says that we should have like a divided up government with limited power, and then let's combine all of these forms of government. Let's combine monarchy, let's combine aristocracy, and let's combine like Aristotle calls it a constitutional government, which is basically a republic. Let's combine these best forms of government into one thing. And I would say that all three little tiers that we have in America, they're all the corrupted form.
They
I
are.
would go so far as
So,
to say that.
I would agree. But let's move on to the next version, the next level of good
Yeah.
government, which is the constitutional government, the republic, um, or what a lot of people would commonly say, democracy. Um,
Well, I mean, I think you like confused. Well, I don't know, because like Aristotle says the constitutional one, the republic one is the good one, and he says democracy is the bad one. He says democracy is evil.
Okay, very true. Very
Yeah,
true.
so
Thank you. Yeah.
a republic and a democracy are not the same. They're actually exact
They
opposites.
aren't. They aren't. A lot of people just. I've heard a lot of people just say democracy.
Well, that's because people. I mean, you're touching on a great point there, where people are really uneducated because the
Yeah.
founding fathers wanted America to be a republic. Like I'm going to use the term
Yeah.
republic. So republic. So we talked about monarchy being the rule of one, aristocracy being the rule of few. Republic is the rule of many, where many people are in charge, and basically everybody, the commoner, is concerned with how things are going to be done throughout the whole kingdom. Basically, so the common Joe is concerned with government. He's going to be involved, and this is typically where you in a republic. In a republic, the people get together and they elect somebody, and then that person is going to be in charge of governing, right? So it's not so much that everybody's constantly voting on everything, but the common people vote for the best among them to be their leaders, is essentially
Exactly.
the best way of putting it. So it's a rule of many, but it's a rule of many through a vicar that they've chosen, right? Whereas in a
Exactly.
democracy, they say it's like rule of many, but it's kind of more of a mob rule, where it's the most people are in charge and they're going to directly vote on what something is. And just because the majority of people say something doesn't mean it's good, right? I mean, you typically are going to have the majority of people who are not going to be as intelligent or as virtuous as other people, and they're going to Aristotle. His main fear, and the tradition that follows from him, is that democracy is evil because that's just the mob. It's the masses. It's the great chunk of people who they're not idiots, but they're going to be very easily tricked into being. They're going to be very easily duped by wise people who can speak very well, or people who have a lot of money, and they're going to put all of these
Sophists.
things in front of. Yeah, sophists.
Sophists.
Exactly, tying back to the beginning, where this large mass of people is going to be very easily tricked. So then cunning people who are rich and smart are going to be able to trick this mass of people and basically take over the government with their votes. Right?
Yeah, and I think that actually kind of covers the democracy part pretty well. If
Yeah,
I'm
yeah, it does.
and the republic part pretty well, because now I in a sense I want to trace it back to, okay, what is America supposed to be,
Well,
right?
before we do that, well, I think this is kind of related to it. So it's like people think that we live in a democracy. We have to defend democracy. We have to go fight wars to promote democracy. The founding fathers would not have. They didn't start a democracy. If you'd asked them what government they wanted, they wouldn't have said it was a democracy, right? America shouldn't be a democracy.
Absolutely.
America should
Well,
be a
yeah,
republic. America should be a republic. Now, America exists as a republic, as a government for the people, by the people, but it's not supposed to be mob rule, which is essentially what democracy always boils down to, where it's just the majority of people are going to decide what's right and wrong, and the majority of people are not going. It's more likely now. It's more likely the majority of people, a lot of people, are not going to all be guided by justice. Now, right, each of these branches of government can be corrupted. None of them are perfect, but the easiest form of government to corrupt would be republic. So democracy would be the easiest corruption, easiest, most malicious form of government, where it's kind of like mob rule and it's easy for things to go into chaos, right?
exactly. And that's the thing too. So the American Republic was set up with all three forms of government kind of mixed into one, right? So the presidency was supposed to be kind of a more of a monarchical sort of rule, right? So
Mm-hmm.
the president couldn't get away with everything, right? Like, he couldn't just say this is law, right? He can't just he's not supposed to be able to do that, right? There might be a few instances where he's just like, no, 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 like this is the executive order, this is, and those are supposed to be used. I would use them very sparingly if I was president. You know what I mean? Um, but the other part of it is that let's look at what the Senate is supposed to be. The Senate is supposed to be the aristocracy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And people are like, well, what do you mean we directly elect those people? And we also directly elect the president. No, we don't. We do not directly elect the president. There is a popular vote, but there is a electoral college, right, that truly decides the presidency. That decides the presidency, right? The electoral college is because the founders knew that, like, Joe Schmo in whatever small town Virginia in 1796 wasn't going to make a great decision because he wasn't that informed. He wasn't that educated. Maybe he could speak better to his local politics, but when it came to foreign policy with France or Spain, he wasn't going to know that much, right? Because he's not equal to the people who are sitting in those houses of government, right? But on a local level, he knew what was going on. He's like, "Oh, well, the grain prices are this and this and that, and well, this would be really bad for us." So there, do you understand what I'm saying? Because I see you have
I mean,
some
I
sort
don't.
of
I wouldn't characterize it that way. But I one thing I would think we should touch. Can you pull up a map of like a state or something? I don't know if you could. If you can't, it's
yeah, I
okay.
can. Yeah, I can do
But
that.
the
Keep
reason
talking.
why. So Connor. So the first branch. So our American government was designed in mind with having the three branches of good government put together and basically running. So we're talking about the presidency, which is supposed to be a monarchical institution, but it's one where we vote for. But as Connor's pointing out, the president in the United States is not elected by a popular vote. Popular vote basically just means we added up all the votes together and this is who got the most votes. That would be democracy. And the founding fathers didn't want a democracy when it came to president. They wanted there to be more of a republic, more of a constitutional republic when it came to electing president. Why did they want that? Because they didn't want majority rule. Okay, what's so wrong with majority rule? Well, think about the problem that happens in a lot of states. Like think about Illinois. Illinois is actually a very, very, very rural, very farmy agrarian state. It's very, very, very conservative. Like most of the land of, can you pull up a map of Illinois or
Uh,
something? I don't know if you
oh,
can.
I'm pulling up. I have Connecticut pulled up.
Okay, well, Connecticut's not going to be a good example, but because you, but the issue
I'll
is
pull
that
up.
you have all of,
I'll pull up
you do,
Illinois.
it'll do Illinois, yeah. The issue is that you have all of this land. Most of the people in that land are conservative. But the problem is that there's a really big city in Illinois called Chicago. Most of the people live in Chicago because it's a huge, huge city. And since there's the majority of the population there, the majority of the population in one city basically determines the entire state of Illinois' politics. So basically, even if you live miles and miles and miles away from where all the people live, in a more democratic system, those people are always going to outvote you, and you'll never be able to fully determine how laws are going to be enacted in your own land, if that makes sense, right?
Can you see my
So
screen? Oh wait, hold on.
I cannot see your screen.
Hold on. Okay. Okay. Now I'm gonna add this to the stage. Okay. You can see this. I'm pulling up. This is the map of Illinois. Can you see
Uh,
it?
no, I just see the pilgrims.
Oh, what? What do you
Okay,
mean the Pilgrims?
okay, now I see it. Now I see it.
Okay. Okay.
So it's like see all of these like small little counties. Most of these are conservative, but the top would be northeast is where Chicago basically is. And because Chicago has a ton of people, they basically, since most people are up there, they basically rule the policy for most of these smaller counties, smaller states. So when you get democracy, like just direct democracy, and you have a millions of people living in one city, even if that one city is not in your county, if you do just straight democracy, that city's going to basically govern and take over the policies of all these other counties. So to combat that, like on a statewide level, so that way not just the cities would govern this the country, but also these smaller counties that have smaller populations. The founding fathers set up the electoral college, so that way states uh, it wouldn't just be like a popularity contest, because if it's just a popularity contest, it's always going to be a city contest. It's the cities are always going to govern the more rural areas if you do everything just population wise. So to prevent just huge cities from governing everybody, even if you're a small area on your own, the founding fathers made an electoral college, which basically has each state gets a certain amount of votes, and those amounts of votes don't strictly represent the population, but they do represent the population to an extent, but they represent like the chunks of area, like the different land
Yeah.
chunks. So that way it's not direct democracy, but it's electing via location, if that makes sense. It's a really
Yeah.
complicated topic.
Well,
It's really,
and
really complicated.
but
I
I
wasn't
also
expecting to
think that
jump into it.
I also do think it's fair to say that the founding fathers were like, well, we don't want just some random dude from whatever county, Ohio, being like, oh, well, Ohio didn't even really exist; it was just a territory. Some random
Mhm.
county in Virginia, per se, right? You know, I mean, I would think it was safe to assume that they wouldn't want some just Joe Schmo who had no idea what the heck he was talking about having like a major say of what was going on. Like in the sense, it's like, okay, like no, like we're the guys in charge. You know what I mean? Like I'm not saying that like I love that. You know what I mean? Like I want to be able to have a say, but that might you know what I'm
Well,
saying?
it's because the founders they greatly restricted who was allowed to vote. So I think
Well,
I think
yeah,
they were really interested in the people voting, but the people weren't everybody for them. You know, it's like they were really
yeah.
interested in educated like male landowners. I mean, that's who they were interested in voting. So I mean, they cared about their opinions.
Well, exactly, because those are the people that like were educated enough to actually make an educated decision, right? And
Yeah.
I think you and I are getting to the same point on agreement. You and I agree on this. But I think that is the because they didn't allow just like random people to vote. They didn't. Like
No, they didn't have
you
universal
had to be a male
suffrage.
landover.
They didn't have universal suffrage at the founding of the country because they were more focused on like the republic as Aristotle would
Exactly.
define it.
So
Yeah.
and so this actually goes back to what Montesquieu has to say. I'm just going to go to my I just want to get the quote right. So and this goes back, I'm going to find it too while you're talking. Um so Montesquieu says that in chapter 3 book 3 virtue is absolutely necessary. Oh no, book 3 chapter 3. Right? I don't know. Anyways, doesn't matter. It's from Montesquieu. It's with a 3. Virtue is absolutely necessary for a republic, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that was echoed by even like George Washington. I was telling Andrew that when he was sleeping on my floor as my roommate, uh he George Washington, I wrote a paper on George Washington's political vision for the United States, and what I got from it, what I remember from writing the paper is that a country's supposed to be like a person, right? And if a person's not virtuous, then he's not going to do well. You know what I mean? He's not going to attain good things. He's going to be self-interested. And George Washington had the same kind of thought process for a country, and you could see that in Montesquieu, you can see that in St. Thomas, you can see that in Aristotle. Um, and that also kind of goes back to get back to the aristocracy part of it. The Senate was not a directly elected body for the first 140 years,
Mm-hmm.
120 years, whatever it was, of the United States history, right? But mind you, just a disclaimer to all of you, I am not one that believes in equality. I do not. Like I believe in equality. Like I believe in equal dignity of persons.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm not gonna like. I don't want to. I really have no want to go subjugate people. Right. I mean that would be hard for me to say as somebody who's of very strong Irish descent. You know what I mean? Like, come on, man. But
Yeah, nobody's been beaten around like the Irish except maybe the Polish. But I think what
but
you're meaning there.
but hold on, let me finish.
Okay.
So the Senate was elected by was appointed by the state governments, right? So the reason why that was so is that there was these sorts of checks and balances, because it was also important, right? If you're going to have the lower house, the House of Representatives, directly elected by the people, because that's not a bad thing to have somebody who is elected by the people to say, hey, I was talking to the people who voted for me when I was back in my district. I'm here now for this session of this session of Congress, right? And I'm sitting here in the house the House of Representatives, and they were saying, well, this is really bothering me, and this is affecting my grain prices. This is affecting, how I bring shipments into the port of Boston, whatever it is, right? Then they could be that voice. But then the state governments themselves, right, because the states had a lot of power in the early American Republic, right, were able to sit there and say, oh, well, I'm their voice for the state of Georgia or the state of New York or whatever it was, right? So it was these checks and balances that kept the power also with the people and the states, right? And it also allowed for this form of government to sit there and say, well, the guy in the Senate, he's a well-educated guy. He knows what he's talking about, and he has the interests of the state of New York or Georgia or Massachusetts or Connecticut or whatever in mind, right? He's not there for he shouldn't be there for his own personal glory.
Yeah, and he's got the training. I mean, like, you can't get like all of the farmers to get together to go like make a law, because they have to actually be out working. They can't travel to the place where law is being made, etc. They're not, because then every farmer would have to be like a legal scholar. Every farmer would have to be having all of these other attributes that only come when you don't spend your life farming. And farming is good, but it's basically the republic part is you have to pick somebody from among your people, and you get to pick. You get to pick who among you, who among your local community, who among your family, who has the intelligence, who has the training, who has the speaking capacity to go and represent you among all these
Exactly.
other peoples. So
And,
it's
and this
it's
and the,
republics are still governments for the people, from the people, and by the people, but it's an organized way. It's like go back to familial context, where I have got like maybe 40 first cousins or whatever. And if we needed to pick somebody from among us who was most well versed in, law or whatever, and who's the best at speaking, we're going to go send them to go to the city council meeting or whatever to argue
yeah.
the point that our family, so, or it's like that. So it's basically picking people from among your family who are going to do the best job to govern society is basically what a republic is,
And this is also goes back to the point of like getting towards our final end,
yeah.
because what society is just it's a collection of families going towards what the good is, right?
Hmm.
Is that you're pointing out like, okay, like you don't, and this is where I'm against equality, because the thing is, as I said, you don't want the guy who knows carpentry really well and who spent his whole life. I'm not saying he doesn't know anything about politics, right? Like I know a good chunk of people who can speak pretty eloquently. Like for instance, my dad, right? Let's just use
Yeah.
my dad as an example, right?
Yeah.
My dad's a smart guy, but my dad's a pretty smart guy, and for some reason, whenever I talk to him, I wouldn't say I agree with him on everything, because, I think there's also a generational divide there. And I think I see things in a very, I just see things differently from him. Right. But the thing is that he could sit there. I remember I was having a conversation with him one day about like the geopolitical situation. And I was like, oh, wow. Like he knows more than I do about
Hmm.
this. And like,
Hmm.
not to say, but like his strong point's business. Like he's
Hmm.
good at sitting there and saying, he's good at getting a business up and off the ground, right? From like the very beginning stages of one, right?
Hmm.
But where like somebody else in our family could sit, I would rather trust them with, oh well, this is what the law is, and this is why I think that, this is what and it come back and explain it to them, to
Hmm.
us. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. It's like you don't want to, I mean, because you don't want like a carpenter versus like a lawyer, like you want to send your best person forward. It's not that carpenters aren't intelligent. I know a lot of intelligent carpenters, actually. They're actually very well versed on what's going on. But if you want somebody who's trained specifically to argue for you well, and that's kind of this idea of a republic. We're going to pick the best person in our family to be our representative in the meeting of
Exactly.
all of the families, right? So I mean,
Exactly.
think about like in the American founding in the 1700s. Most people, oh, I don't know if that would be correct, but a lot of people were vaguely related to each other. It's like they were, oh, I'm the fifth cousin because they, 5 generations ago, one guy came across on a boat. So American government at its founding was basically like a bunch of fifth and sixth cousins who are like, we're sending representatives from our family to this big meeting, which is like going to be the legislative branch, and we're going to pick another guy to be the president. So it was still all a familial endeavor where the president's, okay, what's one of my relatives who he's going to be in charge. He's going to be calling the shots, but he's not making the laws. We're going to have a council of everybody in our family. We're going to have a council of the best and brightest in our family to make the laws. And then the common people who are going to be electing the people to the presidency and to the legislative body is everybody else. It's going to be the farmer. It's going to be the soldier. It's going to be the carpenter. It's going to be the blacksmith. They all have a voice, and they deserve to have their voice. And their voice is going to be coming through who they're going to vote for, right?
But
And
there's also,
that's
oh,
what
go
American
ahead. Sorry,
government
I
was
thought you were done.
supposed to be.
Exactly, and there's still hierarchy and there's still tradition and
Yeah,
institutions,
there's
right?
still a
So
hierarchy in it.
like there's still the best guy that was chosen to become the president and to be our guy to sit there and tell France, say, hey, listen, man, stop
Yeah,
the crap, cut it
yeah,
out, you know, or England or whatever it was, or
yeah,
now Mexico or
yeah,
whoever, Saudi Arabia, I don't know, and whoever's bothering us today,
yeah,
on the geopolitical stage, which is everybody apparently. That's a whole different thing.
yeah. It's a whole. It's a whole.
You and
We
I
don't
have
have
the
to. We
same.
shouldn't get into it because there's enough time.
Yeah, I know. But anyways, what I'm saying is though is that, and this gets back to a republic being virtuous, right? Because we're talking about like all these well-informed carpenters and plumbers and electricians and businessmen. Like that's a good thing. Like the more people are educated in this sort of stuff, that's good. But it doesn't mean that they should be the one to go represent you,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like it should be the guy who's trained in law and philosophy and knows how to make an argument, right? And has those ends in mind and knows how to properly argue and go through the motions and whatnot, to be
Mm-hmm.
the guy to go to Washington and represent you, or to go to your state capital, to go to Sacramento, to go to Tallahassee, to go to Hartford or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that we've lost. And
Well, I don't know. I would say I would say everything. I agree with everything you've said, but we've also fallen into an error in our own times where it's like this error of hyper specialized, like trained people who've like never done a real anything. Like all they've ever done is just train to be like a professional politician, and then when they get in, they're concerned about making money for themselves.
Yeah,
Right. I mean, I think of guys like Thomas Massey, who I think he went to MIT and he was like a
an
businessman,
electrical
and then
engineer.
he became like a farmer, and then he became a politician. Like, there's nothing wrong with that because he was qualified.
He's
He
the
was a
natural
wise.
aristocracy.
He's the natural aristocracy. He was like the best and the brightest guy from his area in Kentucky, right? You don't strictly have to be like a lawyer or whatever. But by
No,
those
no, no,
examples,
no, 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 no.
we were meaning that you pick the best guy from your family. And he was he was an engineer who became like a farmer, and he was just enjoying his life, and he saw that his local community needed him. So that's why they sent him as the best and brightest of their community to go argue in the Senate. And I think he's he's a true member of the aristocracy because he's there not arguing for himself or for his own gain, but for his people. He's
Yeah,
there for his people.
and I'm not like a huge Ron Paul fan, like, but I respect him, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he was a doctor. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like he was a doctor and he like just enjoyed reading books, and he was like, "Oh, I don't really like how things are going in Washington right now. Like I should go
Mm-hmm.
represent my people from, I think he was from Texas or something."
Mm-hmm.
Or
Yeah, I think he
like
is. Yeah.
or like a guy like John Randolph of Roanoke. I'm not sure if you know
Mm-hmm.
anything about him, but like he was a natural aristocrat, right?
Mm-hmm.
Very eloquent, very high pitched little voice. From what I've read.
Yeah.
So that's something that's been lost. And as I said, like I've said in every episode, we are going to come back to this because this is just such a deep subject, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's so much I can get into, right? Like with Russell Kirk, for instance, the
Mm-hmm.
conservative mind. I think Russell Kirk's brilliant. He was a Catholic. He knew what he was talking about, and he really knew the Anglo-American political tradition, which I think is awesome. Because
Mm-hmm.
like England, for instance, right? Like England, I'm not saying England's perfect by any means, but the thing is that they had a monarch who is the head, right? The figurehead, at least, right? Who was that institution, that tradition that everybody could look up to as a fatherly figure, right? Or if they're you know what I mean? Or a sovereignly figure, because I mean there has been female monarchs.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then there was the House of Lords, right? And you had your aristocrats, and they were very well educated, and they were there to preserve the institutions and the this and the that. And then you had your House of Commons, who were representing the workers of Birmingham. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you know what I mean? It's
Mm-hmm.
we're here to help, protect the coal miners in Wales or
Mm-hmm.
whatnot. You know what I mean? So I mean that I think that is a good example as well, right? And
Mm-hmm.
to a sense, we did kind of model ourselves off of, whether we like to admit it or not.
Yeah. No, I think that's true. I think it's definitely true that The American founders, they really just took the best that they saw in the tradition from England, and also from, Montesquieu was French, Aristotle was Greek. They took the best that they saw from everybody and put it together into this beautiful, harmonious, almost symphony, to try and make everything balance it out, to try and give the best government they could to the people. Now, you were talking about it on the found. This could be a whole episode of itself, but the necessity of virtue, right? You have to be virtuous in order for a government to work well. It's something Aristotle gets into as well, because virtue is just kind of like following the natural law. It's having the habits where you're going to actually not be too much one side, too much the other side, but rightly reach your end, basically. It's a habit in you that perfects you and makes you the way you're supposed to be, to make the right decisions for yourself and for your community, essentially what a virtue is in a broad sense. And
Yeah.
once we start, and we can only really have that, like we're talking about in the natural law episode, through God. And once you turn your back to God, you turn your back to virtue, because you're not going to be able to be virtuous in the way you should be. And because of that, this great idea, this great model, this great American experiment, I think the various levels of government that were modeled off of, like monarchy, aristocracy, and republic, we're all seeing in our modern day the corruption of those forms in tyranny, oligarchy, and democracy, right? Because we see a rule by the rich for themselves in Washington. I don't think anybody would disagree with that.
No.
Yeah, yeah,
No, like
yeah,
literally nobody.
yeah.
I also think that uh when it comes to people understanding government, they have to have the right principles, right? And
Hmm.
I think that that's where a lot of it's been lost, and that's why we have a bunch of crazies running around electing these people, right? Like truly, I mean, because like I was having a conversation with my mother-in-law about this, and she was talking about how some people, you grew up the same way and this and that. You grew up in the same town, you went to the same school, you had a lot of common interests growing up, but then like they see their social media feed and they're like, oh my gosh, like we're living in Nazi Germany right now, and I'm like, okay, well, hold on.
Hmm.
Like, hold on. But then like you see my social media feed and it's like and it's just like things I won't exactly repeat. So,
Very different. Yeah.
but very, very, very different in the sense that like things today that were normal 100 years ago that you could say, you couldn't say, yeah, like that are frowned upon now. And
Yeah.
and I
So
think that and I think that there has to be a civic education that's been lost. Why do we have this form of government? Like I remember going through it, and it's not just about democracy. It's not just about your voice. Like your voice is important. Yeah, I want to hear what you have to say about the grain prices or the zoning laws or whatever it is. But at the same time, I have a paperclip attached to me. At the same time, like you have to have proper reasoning and proper principles to advocate it, and the best among you should go and advocate for that.
I agree with you. I'm trying to figure
Did
out how that's like super related to the topic, but I agree with you.
Well, no, but that is related to the topic because we're talking about the forms of government. Like how it like
Well,
what I'm
what I
saying
meant.
like well what
Never
I'm
mind. You
saying
go.
is though is that I'm using the example of that people nowadays I do not think have the proper civic education, right? Because okay, let me explicate this a little bit. They think that we should have free healthcare. Well, why do they think that we should have free healthcare? Well, it's because our prices are through the roof and the evil oligarchs are stealing all of our money. Okay, sure, that's a really good point, but let's extract the proper principles on how we could achieve that. Like, let's think deeper here. You know what I mean? Like, if I were to mention, like, oh, well, maybe we should go back to the churches setting up hospitals again. You know what I mean? Because they actually care about us and they don't, you know what I mean? And they don't have their self-interest in mind. They have the people's self-interest in mind, like the people they're treating, and they see their souls, right? But then they're like, oh well, that's all like, like that's medieval, like it's separation of church and state. Well, no, we have to go back to the proper principles as to like what, like I don't think the proper form of government would to be to have the government open up state-run hospitals. I think that actually ends in failure. So we have to go back to the principles, and we have to have a better civic education. Do you see what I'm getting at?
I'm not disagreeing with anything you're saying at all.
No, I know that, but like, do you see
Yeah.
how that relates to the topic, like civic education and being virtuous and whatnot?
I think that's an important topic, but I don't know how that relates to explicating the 6 branches of government or 6 forms of government.
Maybe it doesn't. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm just going off on a rant. We were talking about
No,
virtue in a republic and having proper civic education. I thought that tied in, but
no, but I mean, like,
you know.
I agree. There's not like a proper civic education at all. But I don't want to get into my opinions on that because then we're going to go an extra hour because that's its own episode, you know. But I agree. I agree with that, and I think that's part of the decay. I think because it's where people are just kind of basically just following their emotions and what they see on the news. And when it gets to that point, the people who run the news basically run the government because the people who run the news control the opinions of the masses and therefore they
Yeah,
control the votes, right?
exactly.
So that's kind of the reason why everybody, including the founders, are so hesitant for direct democracy because whoever has the shiny object that you flash in front of the mob controls the government. And
Yeah,
that puts you in a really chaotic state. So that's why the founders were always like, okay, let's be more hierarchical. Let's make all of these different levels that you have to reach. And then that person ultimately makes the decision, but for the sake of everybody below them, right?
yeah, yeah. And they weren't like pulling these, as I said, like they were pulling these ideas from tradition.
Yeah.
Right, like if like you look, I mean, like if you look at like how ancient Rome worked, like the amount of like councils and stuff like that they had to go into how their government ran. I was like,
Yeah.
no, like I remember taking my Roman government, my Roman Empire and Republic class, and I would be like, dude, like, how did this government function? Like, they just like every single time, like there was like a discrepancy. They're like, oh, we got to make a new council. So like
Yeah. So that's part of like, so monarchy's nice because it's efficient. You just got to do whatever you want. But once you get into like aristocracy, even republic, it gets a lot more bureaucratic. It's like, all right, well, so now we have to make a committee to decide upon this fact. And it's like, it makes things a lot slower, a lot more inefficient, but it also prevents things from getting out of hand too quickly. Like, I mean,
yeah,
when a republic is functioning the way a republic's supposed to, right? I mean, we could have a whole conversation. This will be a future episode
this
about
will
whether or not
absolutely
America,
be a future episode.
whether like what a republic's supposed to look like, and whether America has ever embodied that, right? So this was kind of supposed to be like a charcuterie board of an episode. You have all these different things. Like, oh, this is a brief taste of what monarchy is, a little brief taste of aristocracy, a little brief taste of republic, and we can begin to apply it to the modern day. But each of these topics really could, and God willing, will have its own episode at some point.
Yeah. Um yeah, I my parting shot is that there is a when it comes to talking about the gridlock, there's two things that come to mind. There's Antonin Scalia talking. Maybe he's sitting before the Senate. Antonin Scalia, for those of you who don't know, was the greatest Supreme Court justice of like one of the greatest Supreme Court justices this country's ever had. He was a Catholic. He was very good at what he did. There's very few points I disagree with him on. And you know, you would see these countries, right? You see these countries post-Soviet Union that are these banana republics that have the best Bill of Rights in the world, right? But they don't work out, right? Like they, freedom of, all of this, all these freedoms that are on their Bill of Rights. But the problem is that with the United States, it's not up to the judiciary to make laws. That's not how it's supposed to work. The United States, the way it's supposed to work is that you're supposed to send your best guy forward, and you're supposed to get someone to pass a law on something. And what he would say, he would call it in his Eastern European accent, gridlock, right? And in a sense, that's kind of a good thing, because the thing is that humans, as Andrew said, are not perfect, right? He said a very scary thing, because it's true, but like, humans tend to be a little bit more demon than angel, and it's just true,
Yeah.
unfortunately. And it reminds me of also from a line of a man from a man for all seasons, which is about
Mm-hmm.
St. Thomas More. He was the Lord Chancellor of England. Like he was like the king's top guy, King Henry VIII's top guy, and he got his head chopped off because he wouldn't betray his Catholic faith. Long story short, but he said, there's a scene where there is this guy who was betraying St. Thomas More, Sir Thomas More at the time, and his family was like, arrest him. That man's bad. And and they were going through this argument, and his son-in-law goes, so you would give the devil benefit of law? And he goes, of course I would, because this country is made up of laws, not God's laws, but human laws. And if you were to cut down all the laws in England and the devil turned back around at you and smiled, right, he can go after you. And then what would you do then? God's laws.
That's such an awesome scene. That's such an awesome scene for the movie. And it's like it gets to the point where in the government, you're under the law. Like you can't just make exceptions and do all these things to do what you want. You have to follow the law. And that's the point that St. Thomas More is making there in that part of the movie. Like, listen, I have to obey the tradition and the laws that have been passed down to me. I can't just ignore what has come before me or ignore what binds me just to get what I want quickly and efficiently.
And that's my own common interests. For
Exactly,
my own interests, not the common interests. Because, and this is the rest of my parting shot. And the reason I share this is because you have the three good forms of governments. And when you have those good forms of governments and they're producing laws, because good human law has to for it to be an actual law, right, promulgated, it has to be in line with the natural law. It can't go against the natural law, right? This is part of the Catholic tradition as well, right? So if the Senate passed a law tomorrow that said we could just murder the first guy that pisses us off, like that's not a law. That it just isn't. That's make pretend, right? But if you have God's laws, human laws that are in line with God's laws, right? And you cut down those laws, you have nothing to hide behind, because then you're subject to the oligarchs, to the mob, to the tyrant. And that's not good. So, and that's something this country to a great extent has lost, unfortunately. And there's a lot of people who want to bring that sort of rule of law back, which is a good thing. But that's neither here nor there for right now. That's another episode. But I just thought I'd share that because that's something that sticks with me when it comes to the three good forms of government. That the guy in charge has to be ruling for the common interest of those. And you have to respect the institutions. You have to respect the laws of your fathers. That are in line with the natural law.
Yeah. No, that's great. I think that's a great way to end it right there. That's incredible.
So it's probably the best thing I said all day. So anyways, thanks so much for joining, guys. We really appreciate you sticking around and just kind of hearing Andrew and I's phone calls. Essentially is that we always say what they are. We hope to expound on these a little bit. We want to have somebody on very special to talk about monarchy. We'll see if that comes through. We're not going to even, but we're not going to give any promises, but hopefully that works out. And then maybe we might have some other people come on to talk. I cracked the joke that I would be our guest for the aristocracy episode since I so much pretend to be an aristocrat. And then maybe we'd get someone on to talk about the Republic.
Yeah. So we'll dive. All of these things could be dived into too much more at a later date. But thanks for watching, I guess.
Go check out Cristero Party. We want Christ is King. Link will be in the description below. There's articles out. I've written one. Andrew's written a couple. Christian Wagner's written some. Yes, Anthony Abate, we still want you to come on our show.
He could be, he could come on and talk about, I don't know. Maybe he's an aristocrat. He's a man of the, I don't know. We'll have him on.
I don't know. He's just a good kid. He's a well-informed guy. He's a well-informed guy.
He's the kind of guy that a republic needs to be going. He's the lifeblood of the republic. The lifeblood of the republic is the common person who was in his village, and they're having all these great discussions, and they're electing the people that are going to go and get things done. So Anthony Abate is the kind of guy that we need in our republic, and I'm happy.
Exactly. God bless Anthony Abate and all.
God bless Anthony Abate.
We just had to. We forgot to the
Yeah.
last 2 episodes, I think.
That's true. I forgot to be calling upon Anthony Abate.
Yeah, but anyways, for all 3 of you that are still watching, thank you so much, and God bless you.
God
But
bless.
we'll see you guys next time.